welcome to Disasters in History, where we go over disasters that happened during the week ahead and discuss them. This week will be September 22nd to September 28th, and we are going to start with the Lathen train disaster in Germany. On September 22nd, 2006, the brand new Transrapid 08 maglev train was running one of its test runs before opening to the public near Lathen, Germany. During this test run, 32 passengers were aboard the train who were associated with the various companies involved in the installation of the maglev train itself. That morning, a diesel-powered maintenance vehicle had done their daily maintenance of the track to make sure it was free of debris. So essentially, this diesel-powered maintenance vehicle sat on the track and traveled down it and cleared tree branches and all of those kinds of things that could fall on the track during the night. The two maintenance workers in the vehicle attempted to contact dispatch to receive clearance to leave the track, but did not get a response. As they needed permission to move on, they waited there for permission. At 9:53 a.m., the Transrapid Train 08 began its first test run and accelerated to 167 kilometers per hour, about 100 miles per hour. Less than 1 minute later, the emergency brakes were activated, but it was too late. The train smashed into the rear of the maintenance vehicle, which weighed nearly 60 tons. The shape of the maglev train shoved it underneath the vehicle and peeled the roof off of the train. In total, 23 of the 32 individuals on the train died in the disaster. Several of the survivors were only found by cutting through the exterior of the train, and this was the first fatal accident of a maglev train. So essentially what happened is, if you look over here on our train disaster, the original shape of the train is kind of like a flattened so it can go incredibly fast, right? It's got that curve up so that it moves incredibly fast and it doesn't have a lot of air resistance and wind resistance. So the maintenance train is sitting on the track right here. It's sitting up a little bit bigger because it is a bigger vehicle. It is diesel powered, and the train was going so fast, and with that front section that it has that pointed nose down at the ground, it was able to go up underneath the front of the actual maglev train, which the actual vehicle, the maintenance vehicle, weighed 60 tons. So it didn't really get that high, just enough to go underneath the back of it. And as you can see here, it completely peeled the roof of the maglev train all the way off. Now, the actual maintenance vehicle was lifted up and then fell off the tracks, and the two maintenance workers inside were injured but did survive. Essentially, everyone in this front portion of the train was killed. Anyone that was in this back section right here, they had several people that had to be cut out the top, and then a couple people that were trapped underneath and had to be cut out of the side and the bottom as well. Our next disaster is Flying Tiger Line Flight 923. It was a chartered military flight transporting 68 military members and 8 crew members from New Jersey to West Germany on September 23, 1962. As they were flying over the Atlantic Ocean, engine number 3 caught fire, but during the operation of shutting down the engine, the flight engineer accidentally activated the firewall for engine number 1. So if you look at our photo of the actual plane itself, you can see engine number 1 is right here. So if you're wondering how to count engines, you have to imagine yourself as the pilot. You are facing forward. Engine number 1 is the farthest engine from the fuselage on your left side. Engine number 2 would be the next one over, which is hidden by the fuselage back here. And then engine number 3 is the one that is closest to you on your right. And then engine number 4 is the furthest one on your right. So what happened here is they had a fire that occurred in engine number 3. So this engine right here is on fire. The flight engineer, in an attempt to shut this engine down, accidentally shut off the firewall for engine number 1 right here. This eliminated all fluid flow to engine number 1, which caused it to overspeed, essentially speeding up the propeller past its maximum RPM, which caused engine number 1 to fail. Attempts to restart engine 1 failed, and the plane was stuck with only 2 engines because, again, engine number 3 is actually on fire. Engine number 1 has now failed because of the accidental shutdown of the wrong engine. So at that point, they dropped down to 6,000 feet. Approximately 1 hour later, a fire warning was received for engine number 2, and instead of completely shutting off engine number 2, so engine number 2 is back here, it is on fire. Instead of shutting it off, they just powered it down. Unfortunately, that made they had to drop altitude to 3,000 feet for approximately 30 more minutes before engine 2 also failed, So now we are down to one engine, engine number 4, the little engine that could. Unfortunately, the little engine that could was not enough to keep this plane in the air, so they were forced to ditch into the ocean. Now, the pilot's manual for this particular plane and the Flying Tiger airline said that if you needed to ditch into the ocean, you needed to go parallel to the waves and land in between waves to minimize the impact of the waves going on your plane and potentially rip off wings or anything like that. Because this particular plane had 5 different life rafts in it that each could fit 25 people. So you had 2 in each wing. So you had 2 over here in this wing. You had 2 over here in this wing, and then you had 1 in the fuselage itself. So, if you had to ditch into the ocean, you needed to keep all of your wings attached for as long as possible. Otherwise, you wouldn't have enough life rafts for everyone aboard. So, what I mean by in between the waves. So, if you look here, if we do our waves, we have our waves like this, and like this. And you have your plane flying this direction. You got your wing here, you're flying this direction. If you need to ditch into the waves, they don't want you to ditch down into the back of the waves. They want you to turn parallel so that you land in between the waves themselves to minimize the amount of force that your plane is taking into an actual wave. The problem was the pilot that was flying this plane disagreed with that instructions and decided to ditch directly into a wave. Now, the waves at this time were approximately 200 feet apart and 15 to 20 feet in height. He managed to put it directly in a wave. 200 feet is more than enough for this plane to land in between waves. He put it directly into a wave, and it sheared the left wing off of the plane with 2 of the life rafts and sank before anyone could get to it. For unknown reasons, the right wing life rafts were also unable to be retrieved, leaving only 1 life raft for 51 people, because that's how many people attempted to escape from the plane. The max capacity, again, for each raft was 25 people. Now, because the life raft was overloaded, it regularly sank below the waterline and had to be bailed out. In the end, 48 of the 51 people aboard the life raft survive. It is not known exactly what caused the deaths of the other 25 people who died. 3 people on board the actual life raft drowned. However, the other people that died, no one really knows exactly what caused their deaths. When the plane came to rest in the wave, there were a number of seats that became dislodged in a massive pile in the back of the plane, and survivors stated they were unsure if anyone was in the pile. Essentially, it was so chaotic when they landed that they couldn't figure out if anyone was stuck underneath, and they didn't have time. In addition, several survivors also stated they attempted to exit out the left side of the plane, but dropped directly into the ocean because the left wing was gone, as opposed to people who were exiting out the right side who had said, oh yeah, the wing's still here, so they tried to go out the other side to get those life rafts and just fell into the water. So it's likely that at least some of the people that tried to exit out the left side died by drowning when they just fell into the water. If you think about when you're walking off into something and you don't expect it to be there, you just kind of drop like a rock, whereas when you're diving into water, you can kind of expect it. Sometimes it's kind of that shock and you come up and you hit the bottom of a plane or whatever and you can't make it out. That's likely what happened here. It's also likely that several people died in the back of the plane itself. Our next disaster is Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182. It departed Los Angeles, headed to San Diego at 8:34 a.m. on September 25th, 1978, with 128 passengers and 7 crew members. As the flight was on approach to land in San Diego, a small 2-passenger Cessna plane was traveling in the general vicinity. Air traffic control notified Flight 182 to keep an eye on the plane. Flight 182 assumed they passed the Cessna off behind them and began their descent into San Diego. Unbeknownst to them, the Cessna had made a slight right turn, which placed them directly in the path of the descending Flight 182. The pilot and co-pilot could have seen the Cessna below them as it was within their sightlines in the cockpit, but it is theorized the yellow of the Cessna blended with the yellow of the subdivision of houses below them. At 9:01 a.m., Flight 182 collided with the Cessna at about 2,600 feet. Flight 182 began a nearly straight up and down, nose down descent into a home and driveway at nearly 300 miles per hour instantly exploding, leaving only the engines and landing gears as the most recognizable debris. All 135 people aboard Flight 182 died. 7 individuals in the neighborhood where Flight 182 landed died, and the 2 individuals in the Cessna died in the disaster. So essentially what happened here is so you can see Flight 182 right here. You can see its wing is on fire where it clipped the actual Cessna itself. So essentially what happened here is this is going to be Flight 182. I'm really good at drawing airplanes, as you can tell. They are descending down into San Diego, right? They had believed that the Cessna had been going underneath and was back behind them over here. Now, I can't draw a Cessna, but we're going to and then its wing is going to be up here. That's a Cessna. Fantastic. What actually happened, because they were traveling in this general direction, and they figured that they had gone over the top of them and they were now back behind them. But what had happened was the Cessna had actually made a slight right turn, which put them directly underneath Flight 182. Now, the actual Cessna itself was yellow. Oh, you can't see behind my head. Well, let's redraw this a little bit. So they made the slight right turn, and it put them directly below the Cessna itself, or below Flight 182. Put the Cessna directly below the flight. It's a terrible plane drawing. Anyway, they are descending down. They had turned this direction. The person that was flying the Cessna was training to be able to fly only by sight. So essentially, he had a visor on that was blocking his ability to see his dials and whatnot. They made this slight right turn against air traffic control's advice. They should have been able to see them in front of them. The problem was the actual Cessna itself was yellow. The wing, however, was white, but the majority of the houses in that area of San Diego were yellow. So it's believed that the actual Cessna itself blended into the ground below them, and they never saw it. They actually didn't realize that they were going to hit it until literally the moment. One of the last things that the pilot aboard Flight 182 said was, "Oh, baby, this is it," just below, before they collided with the ground. It still remains one of the deadliest air traffic accidents in California history. Our next disaster is the sinking of the MV La Joola. The MV La Joola was a roll-on, roll-off ferry owned by the Senegalese government that regularly traveled from Casamance, Senegal to Dakar, Senegal. On September 26, 2002, the ship left Casamance, headed toward the capital of Dakar. The ferry had a capacity of around 525 people, but nearly 2,000 people boarded the ferry, of which only about 1,000 actually had purchased tickets. Anyone under 5 and many who were allowed to travel for free were not required to have a ticket. As the ferry left for the trip, it was reported there was at least minor tilting of the ship as it left port. At 10 p.m., the last message was sent from the ship indicating good sailing conditions. At around 11 p.m., the ship entered a storm off the coast of the Gambia. According to the survivors, almost as soon as heavy rain started, the ferry completely capsized. Some individuals were thrown clear of the boat. Others had to attempt to swim through open portholes and take refuge on top of the overturned ship. Many of the life jackets had been tied so tightly together they could not be undone because many previous life jackets had been lost or stolen. Essentially, security that had been on the boat before said that anytime anything remotely potentially bad happened aboard the boat, people would grab life jackets and then wouldn't return them. So they tied them together so tightly that they couldn't get them done in theory, unless there was an actual disaster. Unfortunately, most disasters happen really quickly, so when things aren't readily accessible, they are unusable. The ship had capsized so quickly and so suddenly that no distress signal had been sent. The Senegalese government had no idea the disaster had even occurred until other ships arrived around 7 a.m. and informed them of the upside-down ship in the ocean. It would take the Senegalese government another 4 hours to organize a rescue effort, which began in earnest at around 12 p.m. the next day. So the actual capsizing happened at 11 p.m. on September 25th. Didn't get discovered until September 26th. It took way too long to start this rescue. Survivors had been sitting on the upturned hull for hours and could hear screaming and crying of people still alive inside the ship. Local fishermen were the only individuals who were able to rescue anyone. One diver managed to make it inside the ship and found the unflooded cabins where he could see survivors waving and pleading to be rescued inside the rooms through the windows. But the government didn't send any equipment to cut into the hull of the ship, and if he opened the doors, it would sink the already barely floating upside down ship. They had to wait and hope equipment came. It never did. The ship finally sank at around 3 p.m. that day. The official death toll for the disaster stands at 1,863 deaths, making it the second deadliest maritime disaster in history, behind only the sinking of the Doña Paz. Only 64 passengers survived. It was determined after the disaster that only one engine was working, none of the vehicles or cargo aboard the ferry were secured, and the captain did not check with weather reports before leaving. No one was prosecuted for the disaster, and the investigation was closed, placing sole blame on the captain of the ship who died in the disaster. Our last disaster is the SS Arctic disaster. On September 27, 1854, the SS Arctic was an American paddle steamer that was being used to carry passengers from England to the U.S. This particular trip was from Liverpool to New York City, and they were located approximately 50 miles off the coast of Newfoundland when disaster struck. The steamer moved into a bank of fog and soon after was hit by the French iron-hulled propeller-driven ship, the SS Vesta. Initially, it was believed the damage to the SS Arctic was slight and the damage to the Vesta was catastrophic. As such, the Arctic's captain ordered several of their lifeboats to be launched to begin pulling the passengers off the Vesta to rescue them before the boat sank. But before they could launch the second lifeboat, the Arctic's captain told them to stop. He noticed the Arctic had begun to list heavily. Closer inspection revealed 2 large holes above the waterline and 2 large holes below the waterline caused by the Vesta's anchor. They were taking on water quickly. The captain of the Arctic began to try different ideas to stop the flow of water. Placing a sail over the bow of the ship worked briefly before the sail tore and water rushed in anew. They then tried to stuff random debris in the holes, but by that point the water was too deep. Then the captain of the Arctic had his last, final, desperate idea. Full speed ahead at land as fast as possible. But in the fog, they had lost sight of the lifeboat with 12 people in it that had escaped from the Vesta. The Arctic, at full speed, plowed into the lifeboat, killing 11 of the 12 people aboard. The only one that survived managed to leap off the lifeboat and swim away just before the ship struck it. Realizing that making it to shore was hopeless, the captain of the Arctic ordered the lifeboats filled with women and children. This order was effectively ignored by the crew of the SS Arctic, as several lifeboats were cut away, filled only with crew members and not even to full capacity. There were also not enough lifeboats for everyone aboard the ship. Remember, this was prior to the Titanic. As the ship began to sink, the captain of the ship asked one of the last crew members aboard to fire the cannon in 1-minute intervals in a desperate hope to have a passing ship hear them. That crew member was Steward Holland, who told the captain, and I quote, "Let it be known that one crewman aboard this ship did not abandon his post." Steward Holland would not survive the sinking. The captain, with his son, climbed aboard the command post and waited for the end. The captain would survive the sinking by clinging to the shattered remains of the paddle box for 2 days after his son was killed by that very paddle box rocketing to the surface and striking him in the head. In the end, the exact death toll aboard the SS Arctic was never conclusively determined, but it is at least over 200 people. The SS Vesta was able to reach port under her own power, only losing the crew who were struck by the SS Arctic. So the reason they don't actually know the exact death toll is several of the lifeboats that escaped were never found again. Several of them were found with all of their paddles on board, but none of the crew members or anyone that were in them actually were ever found again. So it ranges in what the actual death toll was. There were several lifeboats that made it to shore and said that there were other lifeboats out, and other ships did go out and search to try and find those survivors, but they never actually did. They found the captain, who was sitting on top of the boat with his son's dead body, actually, as well as several other people who were clinging to other pieces of debris. They would eventually find the other lifeboats, but they would be completely abandoned. So no one exactly knows the exact death toll of this disaster. The fact that the Vesta struck the boat, had its entire front end smashed in, but still made it to port under its own power is incredibly impressive, although it was an iron-hulled ship. It's a very confusing disaster, but it's one of those things that kind of lives on in infamy. With that, we've reached the end of this week's Disasters in History. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, like, subscribe, do all those things. And you can tune in next week for another Disasters in History as we talk about disasters that have happened on those dates throughout history. As always, stay safe and remember to check your smoke detector batteries.